guess it's my responsibility to call the meeting to order. So it's typically, this committee has elected a chairperson to run the meeting, so. Turn it all over to you and let you.
Okay, come on in, you're in the right spot.
Okay. I would be happy to do it, but would defer to Laura because she has more experience, so whichever, I know Andrew, if you had any strong opinions, did you want to share this?
I think Laura would do a fantastic job.
All right,
I'm fine not doing it, so Josh, if you want to do it.
you know what, I'll do it, it'd be good, so.
I also think that Josh would do a fantastic job.
Thanks for your
All
second, your
right.
second vote. So I suppose we need a motion.
I would move that Joshua Moe be the chair of the City Council Economic Development Committee for this current term.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed, side? All right, so consider minutes from the September 25th, 2023 Economic Development Committee meeting, which of course, Councilor Dunn and I were not part of, but we had the minutes provided. Is there anything?
It felt a lot longer ago than just September of 2023. But from my recollection, look good.
Okay, do we need to approve the minutes? Yes. I would like to move that.
So
Second.
moved.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Review committee purpose and Iowa open meeting law, I assume, open meeting law is absolutely there, so.
That's my part of it, we can do.
Sure, I'll start and then maybe come
Okay.
back to you. Okay. So since this committee doesn't often meet regularly and there's new members, we just wanted to talk a little bit about what the purpose of the committee is historically. So because it's not a council committee, we don't have traditional bylaws, but based on our historical records, this committee was formed in 2000 and they were kind of charged with assuming leadership of the economic development policy. So exactly what we have on our agenda today. As I mentioned, historically, the committee has met on an as-needed basis. So some examples of things that this committee has been brought together for would be updates to economic development policies like the TIF policy we're looking at today. If we were to establish any urban renewal areas or tax abatement areas, sometimes it would come to this committee first and then become a recommendation to the full city council. Likewise, with any development projects that would be requesting TIF, they've also historically routed through this committee first. We haven't met a lot recently because over the past 2 years, just due to the pandemic and economic environment, we haven't had many projects. So, and then in recent years, this committee has also been involved in the minutes you just approved. So making those community development allocations to business support and arts and culture organizations. Unless it's something that requires a council vote and would go to them as an actual agenda item, typically anything from this committee would just be moved on to the council in the form of the meeting minutes. And then the staff person for the committee has also historically been the economic development coordinator and elected chair to run the meetings. Because it is a public meeting, you are all subject to open meeting law, with it only being a 3-person committee. It makes it difficult even for just 2 of you to talk about economic development issues together. So I was gonna let Eric talk a little bit just about how that law will apply to this.
Right, well, Rachel's already kind of gotten to the key part of it, so this is considered a governmental body under chapter 21. And of course, there's only 3 of you, so as Rachel suggested, any 2 of you talking about, any 2 of the 3 of you, I should be clear, would constitute a quorum and thus would need to be noticed up. Now, any of the 3 of you can speak to any of the remaining 4 council members, that would be fine. Of course, assuming you don't get the 4 of you, but just between the 3 of you, just be sure not to be discussing these issues outside of a public meeting. That's really it.
Any questions? All right. No questions, we move on to item 5, we don't take a vote on it for, so, I don't think we need a bylaws or anything, do we? Like, there be a reason for us to establish bylaws or establish any regular meeting pattern, it's worked as it has, so.
Yeah, there's no requirement, and
Okay.
as Rachel indicated, there's been no history of that, but
Okay.
that's not to say you couldn't change if you felt you wish to.
All right, so we move on to item number 4, consider recommendation to full city council for approval of updated economic development policy. And that I think is the bulk of our packet here. And I'm not sure, is this Rachel, are you leading us through?
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
start. Jeff and Eric may have things to add or help answer questions you have. So included in the agenda packet was, kind of a clean version of the recommended updated tip policy. And then, we also included a redlined version, so because it was being edited from different computers and at different times, it's a rainbow, but really the edits would represent any proposed changes that staff has made, so that any edits that you see on the red line version would be reflected in that clean copy as well. So I was just gonna kind of walk through maybe the updated policy, and then we can answer questions you have or have discussion after that. If that sounds okay.
Sure.
So the TIF policy, it's previously often been referred to as the economic development policy in some cases, so we're just gonna call it the TIF policy, the tax increment financing policy. It was last updated in 2017, but in light of both 21 Southland Street development coming up and then other major development opportunities, we knew it was a good time to review, and it was certainly in need of a refresh. So some of our goals with this update were just to continue to maintain our high expectations for TIF supported projects, but also help us be a little bit more flexible in how we achieve goals for each unique project that might come to us. Your economy section of the strategic plan also calls for flexible incentives, so with this updated policy, we are trying to give both staff and city council some more of that flexibility to achieve our goals. And then likewise in the Affordable Housing Action Plan, that also notes TIF as a tool to boost, infrastructure TIF specifically as a tool to boost housing supply. So kind of in line with some of your adopted goals already, in the past, we have used TIF to support different projects like building out Foster Road, some of the Englert's capital campaign, rehab on the senior center more recently, but our current policy, or what would be the old policy, did not really speak to those type of projects. So with this updated, we also wanted to acknowledge that TIF might be a potential tool for those type of projects, infrastructure or other investments in projects that maybe aren't necessarily property tax generating. So historic preservation, arts and culture, public facilities, and those kind of things. As I walk through this, I'll probably mostly focus on what changes we made, but if you have questions about anything that we didn't make changes to, we can certainly discuss that too.
Is there a document that predates the 2017 one, or is the 2017 document the first
There is.
one? Okay,
I couldn't tell you the
no, that's okay.
updated prior to that. So just kind of starting from the top, this first section really just introduces the type of projects that we might consider using TIF for. So really the first test is there an urban renewal area? Would we be open to creating one? And then does it align with the strategic plan? So we've updated that to link our new strategic plan, and then also have included a link to the downtown and riverfront crossings master plan for any projects that would be located in those areas. And then we talk a little bit about some of those projects I talked about in the introduction. So just any minimal or non-tax generating projects or other investments in public infrastructure. We could use TIF for it, or it may be an appropriate tool for those types of projects as well. So some examples, like I mentioned, Foster Road would be an example of public infrastructure, and where it would be an example of where we use district-wide increment to help support an arts and culture use. And then in the past, that last sentence there, any catalyst projects that encourage unsubsidized private development in an urban renewal area, either directly or indirectly, may be given special consideration for TIF. Same thing, we never acknowledged that in the past. It's fairly common for catalyst projects to be considered for TIF in other communities, and we just wanted to recognize there may be opportunities for that in the future.
Can I ask 2 questions on the
Sure.
side? I guess I was curious about the sort of emphasis on strategic plan as opposed to comprehensive plan or district plans. And we go to great lengths to say strategic plan, but it seems like it's been and adopted plans is struck out, and I'm curious if that and adopted plans was the reference to comp and
Sure,
district
so
plans.
which is why the red line version is hard to follow maybe in some cases, but in that second paragraph, On the new version, you'll see that's where we have included and other adopted plan documents, including but not limited to the comprehensive plan, urban renewal area plans, climate action plan, affordable housing plan, and then public facility and recreation plans.
Yeah,
We see the strategic plan as kind of the umbrella plan. You could argue the comp plan would certainly take that role, but. When we think of the strategic plan, it expresses first and foremost a vision with values. You think of climate action and equity. Those types of values we want to make sure that we capture in hopefully our development agreements. And what are we trying to accomplish to move us forward towards those goals? The comp plan, I think, is always going to provide helpful guidance, especially with any type of new construction, land use implications.
the reason I bring it up is just because in not recent past, that was the sticky wicket was disagreements about the legality of the comp plan and its importance or unimportance, and is any of this markups addressing or protecting us from those future challenges or issues? Or would those just frivolous and they're gonna happen, so let it go?
I mean, I think that the emphasis on the strategic plan, not only being kind of the overarching vision and values statement, but I think it enhances the flexibility of the policy. Certainly, any person who comes in with a TIF proposal can point to the other plans as well, but a few things we know, the comp plan is from 2013, except for certain districts, right? And I think having, that question of, does the comp plan dictate or is it just a guide, like, I think will always come up.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's the only thing that someone could hang their hat on to say how a thing should be. But I think this is intended to increase the discretion of the city as far as how this is applied. So to me, it makes sense to really focus on the strategic plan.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense as far as being a direction of a movement towards flexibility. I'm just curious about the defensibility aspect of it, if we're opening the door to, if one is better than the other, the strategic plan is better than a comprehensive plan as a basis for TIF decision making, or it's irrelevant.
Well, I mean, so with TIF agreements, the advantage is that it's discretionary in the part of the governmental body that's offering it.
So,
We're giving you free money, however that's structured in exchange for you doing this thing that you would not be required to do by the comprehensive plan. Or, frankly, any of these other plans probably, but there's real benefit to us, and that's why we're willing, us, the city and the community. And that's why we're willing to offer some infrastructure payments or whatever the case may be. So I'm not real worried about, if your question is, should we exclude the comprehensive plan or any of the other plans from the TIF policy? I'm not concerned about their presence creating liability.
yeah, I'm just avoiding a
I
repeat.
appreciate you asking.
So that was it.
Okay.
That was that first question that I got, so we can move on. That was the only question on the first page.
Okay.
I did have a question about catalyst projects, especially Rachel, you mentioned that that's common, that would be included in other communities. Is there a definition of what we, like, I wrote, when I read that, I wrote very flexible next to it, but like, what are catalyst projects? Is it anything other than, directly or indirectly giving these benefits? Like, how do you define that?
Well, some examples of catalyst projects, I think if you look at the downtown and how we use TIF, we've really felt like those projects have been catalyst over time. So Hilton Garden Inn, for example, and the Edge, those were projects that we really felt would kind of strengthen the entire downtown, bringing more visitors downtown, bringing some new developments south of Burlington to try to keep that momentum going. I think that tailwinds, I would say maybe to a lesser degree there, that was more of a property changing hands and us ensuring that we wanted to see that property redeveloped consistent with our plan, as opposed to a whole block of the Ped Mall being torn down potentially. So I wouldn't say that would be a catalyst, but the Chauncey, I think you could say that was a catalyst. That was certainly something we did to try to jumpstart development in both the short and long term downtown. And there's nothing specific in mind here, but if you take kind of a step back out, we know that we have some major tracts of lands, particularly along the interstate, that are probably gonna see redevelopment over the next decade. At both the interchange with Dubuque Street and Dodge Street, on both sides of Dodge Street, so. There could be projects that come our way in the next several years that we felt will set a helpful tone for a larger redevelopment of that, of those parcels. I don't know if that's the case, but sometimes that's what's needed to not only jumpstart development, but also make sure it gets off to make sure it's meeting expectations, or maybe even setting expectations from day one.
Great, so I'll move on to the climate action and resilience section. So first, important to note that when the 2017 policy was adopted, we didn't have our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals or our climate action plan. So we've updated it to reference those goals in that plan and make sure that this section would again speak to those city goals. Previously, this portion of the policy kind of relied heavily on that LEED certification. But we know over time that, science has evolved and just general knowledge that LEED maybe isn't always the most appropriate for a project, or there may be, other emerging certifications that may be appropriate. So here we've also tried to again broaden that flexibility just to acknowledge other acceptable climate action commitments that help us reach our goals, and negotiate with each unique project to kind of tailor it specifically to that project. So we still have the LEED there included, open it up to possibly other proven rating systems, constructing, of course, above the adopted energy or building code. Notable performance we have listed there, full building electrification, perhaps use of on-site renewable technology as well. And then we speak to a little bit to, a life cycle assessment as being one possible tool for, capturing both, those operational and embodied energy calculations. And again, we want to maintain flexibility here with this section.
So it seems like the recommended changes maintain LEED certification or quote certification in some other system. Is that how I read this?
So I don't think the bullet points should be construed as a ranking of,
No,
whether to
but
or
it's
certain.
not struck. So the blue achieving LEED silver is that's recommended. I feel like there's been
Oh,
a
I
couple
see.
conversations, even with the city manager, about the university doesn't necessarily require certification, but just it's built to that standard. And I wasn't sure if that was a direction that we would mimic. Other cities are doing that too.
This particular point that you're getting at was several meetings of discussion in 2017. The Chauncey, the city did not require actual certification. We required the architect to kind of attest to building to those standards and to document how that would be calculated. The council post that project felt that the actual certification was very important. So that hasn't changed here.
Right.
What we're doing with this policy is providing a menu of different types of approaches that
Okay.
the city would consider. But I wouldn't say that, we wouldn't go to a developer partner and say, pick one of these 5 things and we'll check this box. This is meant to signify some of the pathways that are available, but it may be that we want 2 or 3 of these things, or maybe for a particular project, we think that the life cycle assessment is really the best approach.
Yeah.
As opposed to LEED. We just wanted to give some sort of signal to the development community that this is kind of the framework in which we're going to be talking with you about what sustainability means.
Yeah.
Some may want to do LEED, some may say that's the easiest path forward. We know it, we've done it before. We're confident we can do it with this project, and if we agree, that's great. If we don't think that's enough, we can always layer on full electrification or whatever the case is.
So it would be, the way that this would operate is at the city's discretion, choose 2 or 3 of these, because I mean, getting LEED certification is very costly and it's on this list, probably the difficult to achieve. The other one's like quite easy to achieve, and that it's just up to the flexibility of staff for,
Yeah, well.
and then ultimately it's council to approve it.
Ultimately,
Yeah.
city council,
Yeah.
but this also recognizes that projects can be very different, right? You could be working on an industrial project 1 month
Yeah.
and then on a mixed use building downtown. A retail building the next year, so there are some projects that may lend themselves to particular bullet points that other ones.
To your question, Josh, I do see the change, you know, in that first bullet point. Where it is, or certifying in other proven sustainable building rating systems or environmental management standards. But that is trying to say it doesn't have to be LEED, yeah, which I think is a good shift. Rachel, I had a question as you were reading through these, and I know you weren't reading them verbatim, but I had made a note asking about promoting EV readiness. That's a very specific thing that if I were a developer who was looking for cues as to what the city might want. I would see that specifically being like, ooh, okay, probably we should include that. And I'm just thinking about Sarah Gardner's presentation at council that talked about how Iowa City has actually like an oversaturation of EV charging for the market. So is that something that we want to continue to still call out, or are there other ways we could frame that?
We could certainly strike it. It is, you're right, probably the most specific thing we have in here. It's still a priority of the climate action department. And I think specifically, you know, they talk a lot about providing charging at the place where people live. So, so it may make more, like Jeff said, it may make more sense for some rather than others, but.
Or I didn't know if we
Not
wanted to make a nod to the, in terms of the strategic plan that, you know, mobility overall is the goal, and that there is climate benefits to that.
Yeah.
So, you know, transit oriented might be something that we could, I don't know if we
Yeah.
want to include that, but to me, that would be something that could. Or, you know, could work.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and certainly some projects may lend themselves really well to some sort of transit oriented development style. The EV readiness, as I think about, particularly as we may use TIF to support future affordable housing projects, one of the things that our climate division is very focused on is making sure that EV charging is accessible at all kind of points of the socioeconomic stratus. And right now, what we see at the point of residence is that some of your newer single family homes may have EV charging, but if you're building a brand new apartment building, we're not seeing EV charging being put in. So that could be one where we say, hey, there's a new LIHTC project that's being constructed. It's 36 units, and we would like to support that. Part of that support, we want to make sure there's a handful of chargers for residents to take advantage of. But I think we could broaden something out to include the other transportation related goals.
The climate action and resilience piece seems to speak to specifically to buildings. For any other kinds of projects, the catalyst projects you offered up earlier, like, is there a way to include guidance on what kinds of climate action goals we'd be looking for a road project, or? I don't know, like, there's no guidance as to what a sustainable roadway is.
Yeah.
Right,
So, you know, Foster Road's a good example there. We're talking Foster Road between Prairie du Chien and Butte Street. So just as a refresher on that one, there was a senior housing project, the Vintage Co-op, which is now operational, that wanted to build there, but we had no road between the two. And it was not in the CIP budget at the time to build that road. So the developer paid the cost of building the road and the tax increment that's being generated from the vintage property and some of the surrounding properties now are paying the developer back over a 10-year period for that roadway. We designed that roadway in tandem with the developer. Obviously, it's a public road. We were going to accept it. We ensured there were bike lanes on there. We ensured the roadway width was as narrow as we felt comfortable with. And you'll see that it's blanketed with trees from start to finish. So we really had to, we really used the climate action lens to make sure it was a multimodal street. That, the cost of those trees were put on to the developer as well on that initial outlay. But I think we do that already. Is what I'm getting at.
Sure, sure.
I think that's a good example, again, of just how we're trying to increase flexibility for things like that through this policy, so we have that plan too. Okay, shall I move on to historic preservation? So very similar to the climate section where we, when the 2017 policy was adopted, the downtown historic district had not yet existed. That was designated in May of 2021. So whereas maybe the 2017 committee felt the need to be a lot more detailed in this section, we felt like we can rely on that district designation a little bit more and direct developers to that to understand what their requirements would be and how to develop a contextual development related to that. So that's kind of the bulk of changes here. And then we do note, again, like I mentioned earlier, that historic preservation projects might be one example where we would consider using district-wide increment for something that maybe isn't necessarily property tax generating, but still valuable to our community.
I have a question about the change relating to, so it used to say. New construction requiring the demolition of structures on the National Register of Historic Places or those identified as individually eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. Or those identified as key properties are not eligible for tax increment financing. And the new language is just new construction that will necessitate the demolition of historic structures is not eligible. Is that? Would there be agreement, do you think, on what that means? And again, I was thinking about the Tailwinds project on the Pedmal and how there were very old parts of those buildings that were demolished. But we got the pitch as to like, but the original historic was preserved. And so I didn't know if that was clear enough, or if we wanted it to be really like blanket, whatever historic might mean, you can't tear it down.
Yeah, in that case, you know, we made sure we worked through the appropriate channels to make sure that we weren't tearing off those older additions in a way that was going to jeopardize the historic integrity of what faces the Ped Mall. I think we would take that same approach. I guess as policymakers, it's you know, the ones that are ultimately going to vote on development agreements. Do you know how much definition do you want around those historic structures? Do you want it to be crystal clear, or do you want to be able to have some of that flexibility? Let's say in that Tailwinds case, if this state historic preservation office said, no, you can't tear off those back additions, you'll lose the integrity of the historic structure. You want to be bound by that constraint, or would you still want to be able to proceed and say, we understand, we still feel like this is the best case scenario? This is obviously intended to give us a little bit more flexibility in how we interpret on what we consider a historic structure.
Well, I guess I'm maybe reading it the other way, where historic as undefined here could be broader, and it just says you can't,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
demolish.
I agree with you. That as I read this, the Tailwinds project would not be allowed under these rules. And I think it was a good project and the right choice. So I think the critical question is, will it actually delist downtown as an historic district? Like that to me should be the statement of interest is, you know, nothing should diminish or shrink or reduce the size of the historic district or the integrity of the district. And that does leave a great amount of flexibility, but also a lot of legwork for somebody in the background to actually determine what that means, so.
Well, we keep talking about downtown for this part, but it's not clear that it's just
True.
downtown, right?
The
Like-
previous section was downtown building height and elevation, and now it's just like, we have other historic, yeah. Good catch.
I mean, yeah, and I'm also just thinking about other parts of town where we are coming to an era where historic properties may not be sort of have that community value, right? We're getting closer to where historic properties might be really cheap construction or really, you know, like, I don't know, I defer to you.
No, you're
but-
spot on, there's not a lot of love for mid-century modern, so,
So I don't know if this is one where a more specific policy would actually give the city more leeway. If that makes sense, because if we just say historic. I mean, the question I think is more like, do we want developers to understand that there is a possibility of some demolition? If there is value, you know, if there's other value, even if it's historic in the general sense, but not listed.
I agree with you, and I think that also when we talk about historic, there are landmark buildings, but there's also whole districts, and so I think. Sort of context of the districts should be acknowledged in some way. But. Yeah, a great example, the Tailwinds project, again, like, I think that that's the kind of thing that was, I think, successful on a lot of fronts, so, but. How do you write a policy that allows that? Discretion for the city to say, yeah, you can tear out this much of the building, but not that much, that one had a clear line on it.
I mean, even if it said something like, greatly discouraged instead of not eligible, you know, something that would be a nod to. Don't come in thinking you're gonna tear down historic buildings. But would provide flexibility. Andrew, you look thoughtful.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, I'm thinking about like, I guess putting, I like protections for historic buildings, and when I hear greatly discouraged, and also I want to say prior to me actually getting deeper into this, I really do think both of you have a lot more experience on this issue, so I am trying to take in as much as possible. But just when I hear about discouraged versus not eligible, I understand the quandary that we're in there. But I feel as though it, just in my perspective, it'd be good for us to have some kind of check, whether that's historic preservation, like a recommendation that has to be reviewed by council, or I don't know. Those are just thoughts that I'm having. I understand the desire for more flexibility, and broadly, I think that is really good. This is just to say that I think that, like, just saying discouraged means do whatever, if we don't have some sort of check.
In the context of a fully discretionary decision though, right? So I think to me it's different than like, you know, directly addressing someone's property rights where they have certain delineated rights and we're saying, well, we discourage you from doing that, but you could do it anyway. This is like, we really do get to dictate what the contours of this are. And
That's true.
But so, you know, again, I'm asking the question more like, how would a potential developer read this and what would they think? Could we be foreclosing some really good projects if we leave it this broad in terms of
Sure.
undefined historic being not eligible?
You could just strike that sentence, and then you're leaning on that first sentence quite a little bit more heavily, right? TIF supported projects located in smart districts should increase the diversity and vibrancy of the district, while also preserving and enhancing the historic character. It's probably gonna be a hard bar to pass that test if you're tearing that something.
I like that.
I like that too.
I do too.
Just strike that last.
Mhm.
Appreciate that, Jeff.
But I do think the middle sentence is helpful to them. About being contextual. Compliments.
Yeah,
So-
that should cover it.
I'll move on to the affordable housing section. In this section, we really didn't make many changes, some small kind of clarifying edits, so. And I won't dig deeply into that unless you want to circle back and have discussion or questions.
I had thought we had a compliance period in this already. For the affordable housing. Or was that
It's
just
just
like
by
our practice?
just by
Okay.
practice, so we thought we'd put it in there, it's always been 20 years minimum, or if the length of the TIF happens to be longer, which we haven't done anything longer, we would extend it.
That's a good question. Made sure that was clarified.
So when a development happens in a city that owns those properties in a development, does that just eliminate that requirement for compliance because the city owns it? Is that how that works? It's,
Well, we didn't have this in place for Chauncey.
because the city owns the Chauncey units,
We
correct?
own those
Yeah.
Chauncey units.
But we bought them, didn't we?
We bought them, yes.
Okay, that was
At
it.
a
Reduced
At a
price.
reduced
Yeah.
price, I would say. We did, I believe, have this policy in place for Augusta. And that was a mix of approaches there. So the city does have some owned units in Augusta, but not enough to hit the 15% mark that we were striving towards. So we negotiated off-site affordable housing for that. So the developer owned a apartment building on West Side Drive in Iowa City and agreed to put rent and income restrictions on those units for the compliance period. But yes, to get specifically, if the city is buying units or exchanging and as part of the development agreement, they would count towards that 15%. The advantage there is that it won't hit that 20-year compliance, right? It's permanent affordable housing.
I know that other counselors have strong feelings about permanent affordable versus ones that actually have a compliance period. The like, is 20 LIHTC standard or 15?
A LIHTC compliance period would typically be 30.
30, okay.
Yeah.
Well, do we want to indicate that that's a value in here at all? Is that worthwhile, like to sort of say that we would, you can, if you're providing them permanent affordable, it's a different kind of math, or is that get too complicated? Or do you feel like you have that discretion to sort of make trades if that was something you want? You do have the discretion you need.
I feel we have that. We certainly know that the council would prefer to see those permanent affordable housing units, whether it's city owned or nonprofit, mission driven owned. I would be hesitant to take it out completely. I should say to make permanent the standard.
Okay.
From a cost standpoint alone, the TIF is paying for this.
Yeah.
That's what's filling the gap here. So at some point, we need to do the math to figure out, beyond the 20 years, is it worth the TIF package that's being put on the table? And if it is, then hopefully staff would negotiate that. But if it's not, maybe 20 years is the best case.
I recall some conversation that I think was, I'm vaguely remembering our prior city attorney talking about it in a public meeting when we were still in council chambers, so it would have been like the very beginning of 2020. That there were some questions or concerns about how aggressive we could get on the affordability in this policy, but I think it may have just been essentially, we don't want this to be outlawed by the legislature.
Well, there's always, of course, the risk of if we strive a little too hard that we could be preempted and so forth. But again, with TIF, as opposed to, let's say, in the annexation policy or upzoning and riverfront.
That's what it
crossing,
was. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's
yep,
about
yep.
whether the rezoning creates
Yep.
a need When we rezoned Hickory Hill Trail, it was farm field, we're not,
Yeah.
depriving anyone of. Affordable housing, whereas riverfront crossings, a lot of those areas that are ripe for redevelopment are very inexpensive housing, because they're very old, and not that good. Shoot, we wanna make sure that, since we're gonna be kicking out a lot of low. Income folks from their housing, that we feel justified in creating a requirement to replace that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I think as long as staff understands that. Permanency is preferred, longer terms are preferred. If that can be communicated in some way. I don't know if it's, maybe it is worth putting in here of just. I feel like there are some community, every now and then we get an out of town developer who doesn't realize that Iowa City actually values affordable housing. And they start talking about how all the property values are gonna increase and won't this be great? So I don't know if it's worth putting in something with the idea that this is. For transparency and consistency to have a nod to that. I mean,
Right.
and it may change with future councils as well, but
I don't think it would be difficult to put in a minimum 20-year compliance period with a strong preference towards affordable, permanent affordable housing.
I think that would be a good nod to-
Along with our current council to be agreeable with this too.
and I think that, I'm. On the mayor's behalf, I'm thinking about the fee in lieu. I know, he feels very, very strongly against using that. And I think, our recent conversations about bigger scale affordability or bigger scale affordable projects. That the city can influence has really shown how being able to cultivate that fund is really important. So I think it's good to have that option in our policy.
I think, just as a reminder, the Nest is what was able to launch the South District homeownership. The fee and lieu generated from that project, and those are opportunities, we didn't know that at the time, we knew we were gonna get fee and lieu dollars, and then we were presented with that opportunity and had the resources to take advantage, so. While maybe not first preference, it can, help elevate other affordable housing opportunities.
I have a theoretical, I don't think it's a possibility, but in the case of 21 South Lynn, if someone proposes something that has. No housing in it at all, there's no requirement then at all.
Correct.
Okay, moving on to economic justice section, again, we kept this section largely the same, except you'll see we kind of broadened the language beyond just wage law to also include workplace safety, child labor, or other labor laws. So we also had in this section, previously, we were listing out certain provisions that were to be included in the development agreement. Upon reviewing that, you start to ask, you start with that, kind of where do you stop? And then are there additional labor provisions we may want to add in the future? So again, we thought it was best to just keep it out of this policy and deal with it in the development.
Does staff have a sense of, so this is, what's coming to my mind is with ARPA, how there's all these federal laws that come into play and there's like that addendum of just a full page of statutory citations and knowing that a lot of those who are receiving those funds do not have the capacity to understand the compliance requirements for that. Do we see the same thing with developers? Like, do we have a sense of whether, my concern again is related to transparency, right? Of just like, would the average person, or maybe not the average person, because we want, all kinds of development. Do we think that's clear enough that this really means a lot of pretty serious requirements that are stringent? Maybe that's more a question for you. I don't know how we enforce them or how we check on them.
Well, so the danger in kind of having something more exhaustive insofar as the list is concerned is then people start seeing it's this and this alone. Even if
Right,
you-
right.
Even if you include language, including but not limited to, or something like that, and then. Good heavens, we didn't list child labor law, and then you've got this Cedar Rapids case where you got a 14-year-old working for a subcontractor or something. Shoot, I forgot to list that. We thought it was obvious. So that's why we were kind of favoring a more general.
I agree with that completely. And I'm wondering if there should be some nod to like, no, really, this means something. You know, because I just feel like, and again, as an attorney in contracts, they like, you'll comply with the law.
Yeah.
Nobody thinks about what that means,
Mhm.
and so is this a situation where, maybe the question is this, are we requiring more than other communities enough that it's worth flagging, just from like an expectation setting standpoint? Or is this really what everybody does and anyone who develops should understand it?
Yeah, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is only just reiterating that they'll already follow any laws already in place that they should be following. So it doesn't, you know, with federal grant monies, additional federal requirements like Davis Bacon might kick in. We're not asking for that unless they're getting federal dollars. This
Okay.
is just clarifying that there are laws on the books at the federal, state, and local level, and we expect that you're.
I think you're following the most protective to workers of them, right?
And
Yeah,
I mean, there's kind of that,
Yeah.
we have some conflicts.
yeah, there's certainly, so some of the concerns were, that came out of this, and they're not necessarily tied to a specific project in our past, but more of just the industry in general, was that there are construction projects in which people believe that workers are being misclassified intentionally, or workers are getting cash payments inappropriately. You might have child labor violations. We wanted to try to be a little bit more clear that these are really important to us, and you have a lot more than a visit from OSHA waiting, you know, as kind of the consequence. You might be risking the entire economic development package should you violate these. So one, we want to make sure they have a clean history, and two, we want to make sure that they know going in that they have to pay really close attention because they've got a lot more writing than a typical project.
Okay, so I think what you're saying is that by the addition of the words like governing wages, child labor, I think we really talked about workplace safety in the prior version as well, and other labor laws, like that is that nod to like, no,
That's the
for real.
flag. Yeah,
Okay, I'm
that's the intent.
good with that.
Why is the moment in time selected building permit as opposed to building occupancy?
Which part are you looking at?
Develop, no later than filing of the application of the building permit with the name of energy subcontractor to valid either work. You want just to schedule a value at the beginning of the project?
Yeah, I think it was, this really came from labor back in 2017. Just as a call for increased transparency, right? Our relationship is going to be with the developer, who may or may not be the general contractor on this, but was really a call for community transparency on who is working on this project, who is actually getting the work. I think to hold them accountable should something go wrong, but also hopefully to show that there's local employment being boosted by these projects. It's not always the case. Sometimes you get an out-of-town contractor, but the idea was that it would be much more transparent than in a typical project where we may never know who or the public may never know who the subcontractor is or inspections to be certain.
That makes a lot of sense.
And that
It
is at
seems,
the
it seems
beginning, so-
misplaced though in the child, it seems misplaced in economic, no, not misplaced, but it's like, I understand that the workplace safety, child labor and laws are things that would be discovered during construction, but what's the economic impact is really the schedule value at the front end is. But yeah,
Maybe it just
Sorry
has to be a
interrupted you.
separate paragraph. Maybe it's a,
that's fine, you don't need to nitpick this, I just, makes sense now.
Okay, moving on to the quality jobs section, no changes here, again, this section really, so kind of what we just talked about, this section isn't just talking about any jobs that may result from a TIF supported project, it's really talking about jobs-based TIF incentives, so if a developer is coming to the city specifically asking for assistance because it will help them create or retain high quality jobs, then our policy states we would kind of rely on the state's high quality jobs program and those requirements to help us determine what that incentive should be. And then the underwriting and application section, again, not many changes here, just kind of some clarifying and formatting, but I'll talk about a few things. So really for all the discussion about, you know, different public interest benefits that a project might bring, I think this financial analysis is a really crucial element of TIF eligibility, right? So
Mhm.
that but-for test, may also be thought of as kind of the last dollar in, so really, a developer should have all other pieces of their financial package in place, except for maybe that gap that they're requesting from the city, and while we may not do it for like public infrastructure or non-property tax generating activity, we typically have used a outside third party agency to help us review project financials and assess the need for gap financing. We don't have that expertise in-house, so we use that third party support. Thought that was really clear. Other questions about this section?
The city pays for the NDS or whoever's doing that, we don't require the developer to pay for that.
Right.
Okay.
Correct. Utilize economic development budget to pay for that.
We make them pay for it.
We have not in the past.
Okay.
You certainly could,
What's the scope of?
I don't know the cost of it.
Yeah, that's
it wins about, I think we paid probably $25,000-$30,000 for the consultancy on the Tailwinds project. Prior to when we had a little bit more frequency, so maybe that 2012 to 2018 period when we were having a little bit more frequency, we had a group on retainer for about $80,000 to $90,000 a year to do these types of reviews for us. And maybe one or two going on at any given time. Keep in mind, some of these can go on for a year or more. The Chauncey review was definitely over a year as that project was put together. But I would guess a one-off is still probably in that $30,000 ballpark. It probably would be an eligible TIF, eligible expense to be reimbursed on too. I think we could certify that expense and utilize the increment to pay ourselves back too. But it hasn't been prioritized.
Yeah, I just don't know what other, if they make us totally weird to require that. Or if we know enough about what our neighboring cities are doing. But I like, yeah,
They're not doing a but-for test with a third-party consultant.
they're just letting it go freewheel and.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
we're a little unique. I don't know if there's anybody else in the state that is doing doing a third party. I don't want to call them out specifically, but I think we're pretty unique in having a third party
Okay.
review.
Is there, that last option that you mentioned of having it be a certified cost that we could reimburse ourselves? Is that something, that wouldn't be something that we would need to state in the policy, right?
No.
Is that some, like, just what's your gut reaction as staff to that idea?
I would much rather go that route than have the developer pay up front for that. These. There truly is a gap. Every dollar that you have to expend in the kind of the planning phase is a barrier to getting that project done. So for us to be able to upfront that cost and then potentially reimburse ourselves is a much cleaner path forward, and I think will be one less barrier to overcome.
In my brain, reimbursing ourselves has some positive impact on the general fund. Is that true?
Yes, it would.
So I like that idea.
But you'd be pulling increment from your other taxing budgets to
Right,
do so.
right.
So probably depends on
Over
the
time,
perspective.
yeah, well.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll look into that. We have to make sure it's eligible, but we can definitely,
Thanks for indulging in that.
Really, nobody else is doing this.
the third party
Yeah.
review.
Well, I know we have a neighbor who doesn't do it, but really like Des Moines and.
Not to my knowledge, no, not to my knowledge. Now, some communities like, especially like Des Moines, may have in-house expertise that we may not have, that has that real estate finance, experience. And I would say for a particularly large project, if you're looking at, an arena, a major, like a sports stadium, you're gonna have somebody that's gonna assist. Most cities would have somebody, but a hotel, a mixed use building, most cities would not have a third party review that.
Okay, well, that's kind of my review, so we can have take any questions that you might have, you can have discussion. I think maybe before the entire conversation wraps up, we'll just review, make sure we're on the same pages about changes you want, but if you felt supportive of the policy with those changes, then we would just want to recommend we take it to full council. We would prepare the resolution and the final policy and then take it to council. Unless, of course, you feel like this needs more conversation at this level. But otherwise, you're welcome to discuss and ask questions now.
The exhibits.
Oh, yeah. So, changes to the exhibits, we have an updated, urban renewal area and tip district map. This is maybe a little bit premature, but we anticipate we had 3 districts that have expired, so we're planning to bring those to full city council at their upcoming meeting. To take those off the books, which is just the best practice, so the urban renewal area and tip district map, have been updated to reflect that those would be removed.
Just to be clear, the one that's in the packet says November 2018, 2016, 2018. I don't know.
There's, this
That's
is
the old
current.
one,
Okay.
that's the old one, so,
So
Oh,
this
I
is
do
not the
have the
updated
old
one.
No, this is the updated.
Okay.
It says November.
the red line version, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
Oh,
So
it's
the
in
red-
it's in the front. Okay, sorry. Thank you.
So the
Thank
red
you.
line would show it as being
As the
struck,
old
but
one.
it doesn't.
Got it.
Other part of the state.
I just flip packet. There it is. Thank you. Bye.
Lindsay.
No, not at all. I just was like, I just don't. And it's not like I would know off the top of my head what the differences were.
Yeah, some of the, again, an economic development within the rural area will eventually expire. It's not like the downtown university that's perpetual in nature, so we just haven't taken steps to retire those that have been expired, and we're not prohibited from bringing back one of those urban areas, starting one. So Northgate is an example, the Sycamore Mall, First Avenue is another example of those are areas that still, probably need some public support in the future if we really want to see those areas take off. In order to do so, we have to start from scratch and create it.
Other next exhibit B would be just a close up of the city university area, an area with a lot of activity, so that one is referenced specifically. Of course, we can provide, individual maps for any of these areas to developers if they're looking at it and need to know.
And there's no change to that map.
Yep, correct, no change to that. And then since we removed the references to, the previous policy had references to like certain pages of the downtown and riverfront crossings master plan. Which then referenced these other downtown riverfront crossings building heights in what would have been the older existing exhibit C and D, so we removed those as well. And I apologize, I think I skipped. Oh, and then the new exhibit C in the policy would just be the strategic values.
And exhibit C and D are the 2 that seem to create the most problems too. So happy to see them go.
Yeah, the building height, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, because we have like 4 places that are comprehensive planning district plans that are
Yeah.
understandably.
I think a good one to look at in this meeting is look at the 21 South Lynn map. How that property is identified on that map. There's not a whole lot of clarity for the public. It actually shows 2 different broad ranges of heights that may be appropriate, so.
Right.
And we recently said no to a 13-story building on the Board of Adjustment for parking because it said a code didn't meet the comprehensive plan, so we have a rule information action.
Again, I think we have the plan to guide us. It's going to take interpretation as much as we want the plans to tell us exactly what we want in the moment. Plans are always going to be subject to interpretation, and I think that's going to be your role as city council to this doesn't preclude you from, being at the council chambers and saying, bringing up this exhibit and saying, I can't support this because this is how I interpret this.
Yeah.
You still have that ability as a policymaker to do it, but it allows us to have a conversation initially and explore these projects and get them to the table a little bit easier.
I don't have any other questions. I guess I have a question for process wise, which is just, I feel like we did have a couple of things where like, oh yeah, we might add that. I'm comfortable with those being added and then just going to council, but how others feel.
Yeah, did you wanna go through and
Yeah, should we
highlight
maybe
the few things and
review
the
what
three of us?
I have noted.
There's like 3 or 4 things.
Yeah,
that we changed, so,
I'll review what I have and you guys can correct these wrong things. So the first I had in the climate action section to maybe just speak to mobility in general, in addition to readiness. Next, in historic preservation, I have to strike the last sentence, begin new construction. Next, in affordable housing, I have to add after the minimum of 20-year compliance period, where there's no preference for permanent or longer term. affordable housing. Not gonna probably be up, but the possibility.
You, as counselors will also be voting on this with your other peers, do you think it's helpful to have the red line version in the packet for that group, or?
Yes. Just to show the comparison, yes, I would say so.
Good with that?
I'm not as confident as you are,
Yeah,
Andrew.
Yeah,
It's a
I
good
think
idea.
that will invite a lot of very word specific nitpicking, which I guess I take our role as to kind of get past that first hurdle. I wouldn't want to prevent that, and I don't have any problem with the transparency, but I think that then puts it on us to be very clear in saying we had a, more than an hour long conversation where we went into what about this, what about this, what about this? I think we'll just have that same conversation at the dais. And maybe that's appropriate, I don't know, but I see our role as getting to a place where we're recommending a policy and can say, we considered the 2017 and have very specific changes that are reflected in what's in front of you tonight.
And I would add to that, that this document that we're looking at with the couple of changes that we're making is provided to them already. Like they all have,
That's true.
they all have access to this document. And the minutes to this meeting. Yeah, if you feel very strongly about it, I'm not gonna say no, but I just feel like it's gonna,
I do. I think like, in terms of transparency for the public and for, the other counselors that aren't here, I do think it's important. I think that your concerns about this are all valid. I understand them, but just showing the differences, I do believe it's very important for transparency.
When in doubt, I would always err on the side of
Yeah.
transparency.
Yeah, I don't-
I agree. I'm just questioning my
Yeah.
logic
Yeah.
in my brain, but.
Yeah.
And just so for Andrew, for you and for you, Josh, I feel very confident in our ability to say. We talked through this at length and we had a good discussion and, feel very good about these changes. And of course, if the full council had additional changes, we would make them on the dais, but I think just being able to. Speak to. We had the opportunity to be very nitpicky and here's where we landed.
yes,
It's my feeling.
I agree with you. All right. Good. We'll share the market version. Is there anything else to do? Do we actually vote on any of these? Vote on this with the 3 recommended changes?
Well, right, I guess what I would ask for is a motion to approve the revised version that's subject to the changes that the 3 of you have outlined and originally for
So moved.
and recommendation. to council.
Andrew moved, your Burbidge,
Second.
Okay.
all in favor?
I.
None opposed? Okay. I think we get to move on to update from Greater Iowa City Inc.
Sure, so we provide funding to Greater Iowa City annually to help provide economic development services to our community. So we've invited Mackenzie DeRue to give us an update on where they're at. Make sure you all should. If we go to the browser. And then just share it with Zoom so I can.
How's that look, Andrew? Wonderful. Thank you all for the opportunity to provide some updates and for your support of Greater Iowa City. I know we did come and do sort of a whole group presentation to council not that long ago. So really wanted this to focus on some current updates about what we've been doing most recently, and I'll try and keep it brief. Best way to advance here. There we go. So highlighting today our recent regional advocacy trip to Washington, DC. Some updates we're making to merge space, including sort of launching a business resource center there. Our underestimated business support grant we recently secured from Johnson County. Some updates on the pop-up metro plan that we're investigating currently, as well as upcoming thoughts on strategic investment districts. So we had a great trip to Washington, DC a few weeks ago, sort of regional fly-ins with Cedar Rapids, or something that we had done historically that had fallen out of practice for about the past 10 years. And so we were really excited to bring those back. We had about 35 leaders from across the region join us, including from major municipalities, as well as business leaders. And we met with Senator Grassley and Representative Miller Meeks, as well as Representative Hinson and some of Senator Ernst's staff. And really focused a lot on workforce and some immigration reform topics, especially as it related to STEM designated fields, Pell Grants and expanding eligibility for those to include the trades, in addition to the continued support they provide for the University of Iowa. And then also infrastructure projects, including the Burlington Bridge project. So I wanted to share. There's Nancy and Mayor Teague playing a game outside the congressional baseball game for charity. And then you can see in the back, your top 10 Public Works Director, Ron Pecky, getting ready to talk to Senator Grassley about bridges. The senator cares a lot about bridges, so he was invested in that update from the city of Iowa City. Business Resource Center. So throughout the merger process, one of the things that has been top of mind is to really make the most of the wonderful central space we have in downtown Iowa City that's available via public transit. And so trying to find ways to activate that space. And so we are pursuing a business resource center that would provide sort of office hours, if you will, for core business functions that would be available to all members, right? Because of the new model, all Johnson County businesses are members of our organization. So focus areas would be accounting, IT, HR, legal support. We would pull in partner organizations like the Small Business Development Center, our public libraries, JPEC, Community Foundation for Johnson County, and so on, as well as highlight some of our investor businesses who provide those services. It's really important for us, and it's an aspirational goal, but that the people providing counsel and service are representative of the community. So we're thinking about diversity as well as perhaps even translation technology moving forward. And we're scheduled a soft launch for late August, hopefully. So we're still working out the schedule for how that will work for availability. But as part of that, we have made some renovations to the merge space. If you haven't been in there recently, you'll notice we've got this new shelving in there as well. There's Connor waving from the check-in. That'll be really helpful for the resource center because it will allow us to have a more of an intuitive place to go and talk to somebody instead of just kind of wandering and looking for the first person to help you if you need direction. And then also it means that we are all now co-located on the same level. Before we were split, still a business partnership office in the basement and ICAD up top. So now our whole team, all 13 of us, are upstairs on one level, which is really great. And then also we decided to maximize some space, especially with the increase in people having virtual meetings post-COVID. There wasn't really great space to take those calls on the bench space. So we moved the conference room in a few feet and now have these little pods along that back hallway so that you can go in and take a Zoom call or a private meeting. They are sort of padded with soundproofing materials, and they've been really popular already with the people who co-work in the space. We also recently secured a $500,000 grant from Johnson County's ARPA program, and that was a partnership with Greater IC and the Community Foundation of Johnson County. It essentially allows us to run a grant program for underestimated businesses. Greater IC and the CFJC had done something similar during COVID with about $50,000. So it was the same sort of proven concept that now we have more funds to implement. And then it will also help us meet the goals of the Inclusive Economic Development Plan. This is quite new, as in a couple weeks ago we found out we secured it, so there's still hiring and planning to be done for that, but we're really excited about this opportunity to expand that service line. Pop-up Metro, who all here have been to a stakeholder meeting about the pop-up Metro? Several individuals, you were on vacation, I believe. So the pop-up Metro is, so we know that there's been a long-standing discussions about how to maximize the Crandic line, that we currently have the bus rapid transit study going, but this opportunity became available to us and we are investigating it. So a pop-up Metro is essentially a rapidly deployable passenger transit line along the Crandic. And the company will provide a lease kit that includes the actual train cars, charging infrastructure, modular platforms, and maintenance. And what this does essentially is it functions as a live study that can prove ridership rather than just project it. And then you can decide after a 3-year period if you'd want to make additional investments in that type of infrastructure. So that's what the train cars actually look like. Katie and Evan are going to Pennsylvania next week to ride on a real one and sort of just make sure and see it in action. And that's a map of the Crandic line, so you can see where some of the stops would run, but it would really provide a great opportunity to connect North Liberty and downtown Iowa City. We think that there's lots of benefits to the pop-up Metro, but for our organization, really it is prioritizing how do we help get workers to jobs is sort of the business case that we've been hearing, especially with increased growth in North Liberty and the new North Liberty Hospital, to be thinking about transit as a regional opportunity rather than individual municipalities. And so we're excited to help facilitate that conversation. We expect sort of a mock-up budget any day now, and once we have that information, we'll continue to sort of share that out with stakeholders. And finally, strategic investment district. So again, this is one of our organizations, I'd say the big ideas or the new approach is to really think about how we can get input from our council members and business community to isolate a specific district to try and have some targeted private investment into. One in North Liberty, one in Coralville, and then one in Iowa City. So we are hoping to have those areas identified within the next year, and that we would partner with planning staff to figure out how best to focus that private investment. Certainly TIF might come into play, and so it's been really helpful for me to hear your conversation in this new policy today. There is precedence for doing this type of work. Invest Des Moines is one organization, and so we are in the works to sort of plan a field trip to go see how their operation works. And so if you're interested in that, just let me know and we can sort of add you to the interest list as that gets firmed up. Those are my updates.
I would love to ask a question.
Yes, please.
With the $500,000 ARPA underestimated or represented business grants, like what's the duration of time that you're expecting that to last? I mean, is that you'll spend it all in a year, or this is 5 years, or how big are these grants that you're thinking about granting to people?
That is a great question. So I didn't write the actual grant application, so I can certainly talk with Katie Gerlach, who did and was more involved in the previous program. And can follow up with you on that.
Yeah, I'm just curious if these are a lot of $1,000 grants or a couple $100,000 grants, what the idea is.
In general, ARPA funds have to be expended by the end of 26.
So they would need to be seeking larger asks or have a big. Okay.
Probably large. I mean, they could vary in size, but $1,000 grants would take a while.
Yeah.
So there's probably going to be some bigger commitments.
And I think, so I was still on the CFJC board when they did the prior grant cycle that Mackenzie mentioned, and they have like a panel of people who sort of were giving input and helping provide feedback on it. So I think that's part of the plan for this one as well.
Yeah, there'd be an application process and a review panel.
I think it could really complement how we've allocated our ARPA dollars. Well, we've put a lot out there. They're working in the community right now. And I think what we're going to find over the next several months is where maybe there's some gaps where we didn't cover, or maybe where we provided some funding, but we're recognizing as a community we could really use additional funding to take it to the next level. So I'm really hopeful that Greater Iowa City will, and the Community Foundation will be able to identify.
Who didn't get Iowa City grants?
Well, not necessarily who, I mean, it could be who didn't, it could be what areas, didn't receive funding, let's say, for example, we really didn't put much into marketing support, and they can really target that. But I think as our dollars go to work, what's the remaining need should become a little bit more clear. And that's where I think these funds can really make a difference.
It's great. Looks like it's very exciting. I just want to dive right into who gets the money and when. So. Yeah.
Oh, we have things for that.
So we're on item 7, old or new business.
I was just wondering about the kind of frequency and cadence of meetings. We talked a little bit last September, I think, about wanting to have more. Maybe opportunities for educating us and kind of getting up to speed. I may be overthinking it. I overthink most things. But I'm thinking about Andrew, you saying like you're sort of deferring to me and Josh a little bit and, learning and taking it all in. I'm in my 5th year. I feel pretty confident, with some of these premises that I've been exposed to even before that. But I think it would be good if we can, if there's staff capacity to just have some educational components so that when economic development issues come to the full council, we can all sort of be like, oh yeah, I know a little more about this topic and here's what I think. And of course, use that in talking with our colleagues just in a more informed way, if you two are interested in that. And staff has capacity for that.
I'm very much interested in that, and I can imagine a situation where we meet quarterly or something, and no offense, Mackenzie, but maybe you only get to come once a year, and we bring
Fair
home
enough.
builders once, or we
Yeah.
bring somebody else, a different group, and just doing private economic development group work, and sort of learn, but also signal that we're interested in investing in Iowa City.
Quarterly is exactly what I was thinking about, Councilor Mo. I would very much agree with that. I think it'd be a great opportunity for us. I'd love that.
No, that's something that seems reasonable from a.
Sure.
You're it, Rachel, you're
Yeah.
economic development,
Yeah.
so.
Is there any, you say education topics or speakers, like, I'd be happy, and you can think about it, but if you have any, that would be really helpful to know what kind of things.
Well, one thing I wondered about was sorry, Andrew, go ahead.
I was going to say the Building Trades Council might be valuable at some point. That's the first thing off the top of my head.
I know before, maybe even before the merger with Greater IC, there was some conversations about just how to make sure developers and members of the business community feel connected to council. And I think, I might be making this up, but kind of like the listening post idea, and thinking that this committee might be a place where there could be some dialogue, not for the listening post necessarily, but like if there are things that come up that it would be helpful for us to hear more directly, but maybe not like a full council work session. You all would know better if there's opportunities for that, but.
I like that, and I think, I just keep thinking about, we know that how we need to build more homes, housing, so the builders, the developers, are people that should stay on top of our lists. And the people who do the work to build the things too, so. But yeah, I can think of other things, we should all think of other things, but I would like that, we can do a quarterly meeting with a guest star.
I think, quarterly meetings are good cadence for us for just general education. We could do 1 quarter on our tax abatement, just remind you what our tax abatement program looks like on Highway 16.
Yeah.
Talk about how we use CDBG for economic development. We could give updates, a little bit more in-depth updates than you get at the council level on the ARPA economic development money that's working in the community. So we could pick one of those per quarter and jump into that too. just build that knowledge base up.
Yeah, because these are all recorded and available to the public, so we can refer people to this conversation. So. Good idea. Any other new business?
Can
Council
I,
Burgess? Oh, yeah.
if we're gonna add, can I subtract to, you know, we started reviewing all the requests from our nonprofit partners like the English Film Scene in Riverside, UNESCO City of Literature. At a time when we weren't doing that very commonly, we started to get into that a little bit more in the mid-2000s. And because it was fairly novel, the council wanted to vet those with this group prior to them just showing up at a council meeting, making individual requests. We're to the point now where it's become kind of operating support that's baked into our budget every year. And it can feel at times we're asking a lot of those partners to come and justify that expense annually when we don't have that same expectation for a lot of our other partners that we fund on an annual basis. So they will keep coming here and sharing, you know, the story of how they put those dollars to work and the impact that they have in Iowa City. But it does feel fairly routine and maybe not as necessary as it was a decade ago. So whether that's decided this time or maybe at our next quarterly meeting, I'm just not sure that's a function that this group needs to continue to serve.
The follow-up question I have is when you're saying for not-for-profits that have standard operating expenses, the city's funded for years, and you mentioned the not-for-profits, which I know were in the packet of the last meeting. What about the joint application United Way, Johnson County, Iowa City applicants? Are you proposing changing that process too, or are we just talking about the arts not-for-profits?
Mostly just the arts and economic development ones.
Human services.
The human services would still work through HCDC, and I think the council, you have the ability to work with HCDC to modify that process, and it's been modified many times over the years. They have a subcommittee now that's actually working on modifying it again, so I'd let that naturally come through HCDC.
Okay.
Well, I was just gonna say, I now remember from the minutes that we did talk about having like a more holistic conversation about how we provide operational support in an economic development context, and I think I agree with you that it has become expected and kind of routine, and it has felt sort of almost rubber stamping, you know, and that's not something that we want to perpetuate. And I just wonder how, you know, from a like big picture fairness perspective, some of the organizations, and I think this is reflected through tough questions that I've asked of those organizations when they've come to us for funding, but some of those organizations maybe don't have the same impact as others, or maybe it's changed over time. And so what I don't want to do is sort of just like further institutionalize that continued support, because there's no process for new organizations or those who have, you know, disparate funding to be reviewed. And I'm not saying that should be disproved, but I guess I worry about kind of the complacency where we're giving $60,000 every year to one particular organization, whatever the amount is, without much transparency. I don't have a good solution to that, but some kind of checkpoint or vetting process or impact analysis that isn't just make work.
Yeah.
Would be good.
Our city council pending work list includes a topic about this issue, right? Or did we-
Probably not as
did we-
expansive that would bring this.
Agencies,
Okay, because I think it was maybe more narrowly focused on HCDC and the grant process. I think.
And social justice, racial equity.
Yeah, so maybe it's wrong to expand it, but it does seem kind of connected, and I'm feeling the whole council kind of has interest in it.
Rachel and I will give this, we didn't really notice this on the agenda. Eric's starting to squirm. a little bit.
No.
It's all
But-
business in
yeah.
minutes from
But-
our last meeting.
Well, why don't Rachel and I will give this some thought and we'll bring it up in our next.
I think there's an acknowledgement that it's not perfect yet. The way we're
Yeah.
granting things out, I don't think we have a solution, so we should talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think even I might be more comfortable with something that's like, with Rachel's new role, you know, that part of your budget is operational support for something, you know, that we define, and almost maybe more discretionary than what we're doing now. It would make sense to me.
Andrew, anything from you?
No, I think that all sounds good. I think it'd be nice to have a little bit more background just from my perspective about the responsibilities that we're discussing, kind of taking away, just because it's all very new to me. But it sounds good to have that discussion at our next meeting.
All right, nothing else. I guess we're on to item number 8, adjournment.
Move to adjourn?
Second,
All right, all in favor?
aye.
Have a good rest of your day. Bye, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew.
So yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.